So good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for returning. I hope our friends from Spain are able to tolerate the late hour in Spain. So thank you. I began our hour in the morning with this archetype of the wounded healer. And I think many of you know, I did a lot of work in the 70s around shamanism and how the psychomental crisis, the suffering that an individual goes through in a cultural context where there is understanding of the value of that suffering as a kind of path, can lead to the individual integrating at a much higher level of function in society. And, you know, I often cite the example, of Nelson Mandela, who went through, in a certain way, a psychomental crisis as a revolutionary, ended up in this rite of passage on Robben Island for 41 years, and then became the person who actually brought apartheid relatively to an end in South Africa. But of course, what Gabor was pointing to today is how our narratives shape our behaviors and shape society, and how society also shapes the stories that we tell ourselves. And even in science, the notion of the selfish gene, which has been, basically discarded, but as an idea, has really, it's influenced research in neuroscience, and it's also influenced our view of human beings, of basically being selfish, self-centered, narcissistic creatures. One of the things that I think is very powerful about Buddhism is that the Four Noble Truths of the truth of suffering, of really facing, connecting with, not turning away from our suffering, and looking deeply to the source, which in the morning session, one really felt that process coming alive, and how Gabor interacted with so many of you. And also that Gabor did not turn away from the truth of individual suffering or try to paste a kind of happy interpretation on it, but at the same time had that view of, this is a Buddha sitting across from me on Zoom, and a wounded one, traumatized one, but nonetheless having that natural capacity to awaken, to turn toward our own situation with compassion. And as we touched into this morning, there is an incredible intolerance of breakdown in our society. And it's just a very interesting situation that we find ourselves in, where the climate is breaking down, politics are breaking down, boundaries are breaking down, frontiers are breaking down, and there are efforts at control, command and control, which are very much a patriarchal approach, reflect this intolerance of breakdown. But as we explored and touched into this morning, the value of actually facing this deconstructing experience, where the ego is threatened and is resistant, but where actually we're called to connect and reconnect with the truth of our trauma, the truth of our suffering. I want to mention also something else that I think is important to keep in mind, even though situations or people might appear to us to be in states of pretty egregious disrepair. I think many of you who are on today are part of the medical system. And we know that the cracks in the medical system are really wide and widening. And we also know that we often put all the blame on the system, not recognizing that we are the system. And in a way, it's a disavowal of our own agency. And part of this work, I feel, has to do with both letting go, but also encountering the insight to actually understand we do have agency. We have much more agency than we think we do. And don't let the system tell you otherwise. And from the point of view of complex adaptive systems, we see even as the institutions like medicine or education or politics that we're working in might appear so incredibly fraught, extractive, killing, really soul killing. We know from systems theory that systems that break down have the potential to reorganize themselves at a much higher and more robust level of functionality. And that's because we have learned from breakdown. We have learned from this dissolution process. And the question always for me as a practitioner and as an elder is, can we stay the course in the midst of breakdown and learn from the experience? And obviously this applies to people as well. It's to understand, and I think this is a very hopeful view, and I think it's important to know, and in other cultures where breakdown is not only tolerated, but valorized in rites of passage or in the psycho-mental crisis of the shaman, the experience of breakdown can give one a very deep and positive view of the potential of others and ourselves to actually grow from trauma instead of being crushed by it, being diminished by it. And this refers to the benefit. And I really was touched this morning again and again in bearing witness to so many of you from the psychological changes that some of you went through in the process of sharing the struggle that you've had with your extraordinary, challenging life circumstances. And I know from my own personal experience and also having sat in interview with thousands of people over the years, that people who have survived trauma can actually come back transformed by the experience and see that their suffering has actually made them more resilient, then more fragile because they've connected with it in an insightful way. And to actually have the ability to thrive in the present rather than being overwhelmed by the past, rather than being a toy of the past. So beyond the ending of the old way of being, there's also a hope for the emergence of the new. And one can, in this process, imagine a future, in which the wounds are still there, but in a form that actually makes one wiser and humbler and helps one to thrive. And I feel like, what I witnessed this morning as you all were working was in a certain way, the softening of scars that some of you have carried for decades. But it is not to just reject the wound, so to speak. And it is why this wonderful archetype of the wounded healer really has resonated for me for so many decades, knowing that I now in my 9th decade can look back on the incredible struggles I've had in my life, physical as well as mental and relational, and to turn toward those experiences with compassionate curiosity, saying, what am I learning from you? What am I learning here? So I want to just finish this brief introduction with a piece of a poem I really love by a poet I cherish, Wendell Berry, who's been to Upaya many times over the years, but now I think he's in his Kentucky fastness with his wonderful wife and probably like me, not traveling so much. But he wrote this poem, and in it, he's referring to this sycamore tree that is not far from his house. And with these words, he said, fences have been tied to it, nails driven into it, hacks and whittles cut in it, lightning has burned it. There is no year it has flourished in that has not harmed it. It has risen to a strange perfection in the warp and bending of its long growth. It has gathered all accidents into its purpose. It has become the intention and radiance of its dark fate. Finally, in my book, Standing at the Edge, I make the point that falling over the edge is not the worst thing in the world. In fact, our character is really strengthened when we claw our way back up to the edge. And what drives us back up to our better selves is exactly what Gabor has been working with, this capacity for deep and compassionate inquiry. So Gabor, I invite you to move forward with that inquiry process with our friends who are gathered here.
Well, Joan, I just understood it. I think there was space here for me to say more stuff before I interact. Is that how it is?
Oh, yeah, that's true.
Or do you prefer I interact with people?
No, I think you've got more stuff to say.
Okay.
Please.
All right. So the first thing is, I'm going to push back a little bit on what I just heard you say. I completely endorse everything you said about transformation and agency and all that. However, we are not the system. You would not say to a concentration camp inmate that you are the system. You would not say to a slave on a plantation that you are the system. This system is rigged. If you look at the headlines, 2 headlines in the New York Times today, opposite edge of the page on the top. One is how incredible increase in the business of the armaments manufacturers industry. They love their wars. They love their manufactured threats. They always have, they concoct them. I don't, they do. You don't, they do. They also control the narrative that people hear in the media. I don't,
Indeed.
You don't, they do. The system is not broken. The system is not flawed. It works beautifully. The war on drugs is not a failure. It's a massive success, depending on from whose point of view you look at it. Now, if you look at the system from its stated intentions, in other words, if you fall for the lie, then indeed it's broken. But if you look at the system from the point of view of those who actually control it and benefit from it, it's working beautifully, including the healthcare system and everything else. So one headline was about the increasing income of the armaments manufacturers, who happen to be the biggest donors to both political parties by some strange coincidence. The other headline is about the increasing corporatization and profiteering in childcare. So from the beginning, when people are born, to the end, when we send them off to die, there are people in charge who know how to work the system for their benefit. I don't, you don't, they do. It works beautifully. Now, agency has to come with seeing reality. And people, that's the reality. Now, that's true. Within the system, my work and your work, Joan, is to empower people or to help them find their own power, that is to say, and their own sense of agency. And that's really, in a small way, what you saw me doing this morning. But let's not forget about the reality out there either. Otherwise, our agency is blind.
Well, I
That's
think
the
one
first.
of the things about the system, so to speak, is that it promotes the notion that we have no agency.
Well,
And
that's
that is,
true
I
too.
think, that is really where I, land in this whole process. But the system is also comprised of human beings. And it's very interesting to actually, as you have, and as I have, working in prisons or working in the medical system, to insert ourselves into hostile landscapes or into toxic landscapes, and to see what we're able to actually do in shifting the dynamic in the structures that have given rise to structural violence.
Well, I won't disagree with anything you just said. I maintain my position, though,
Okay.
that the system is working beautifully. Okay.
Well, no, I agree with you.
Okay.
I
Okay.
agree with you that the structures, the system so-called, is working beautifully, but who's working the system and the structures are human beings.
Yeah, well, not for human beings, but that's another story. It wasn't designed for human beings,
Yeah.
at least not for all human beings, nor for beings who are human, for that matter. No, that's the first point. The second point is, somebody asked on the chat line here, apropos to what we were talking about just now, how can we keep our vitality? How can we keep or revive our vitality and hold capacity for others in our environment without feeling so exhausted from grief and our own suffering? Well, I totally get that where that question is coming from, because given what we just said about the system, it's exhausting to find yourself diminished by it or devalued by it or dismissed by it or crushed by it all over and over and over again. But who's even asking? I mean, if you didn't have vitality, you wouldn't even be asking that. So the question is not how we can keep or revive vitality, but looking at what's blocking it. What beliefs on my part? What emotional dynamics? What trauma-based, ingrained mechanisms are keeping me from being in touch with my vitality? So it's not a question of keeping it or reviving it. It doesn't have to be kept or revived. It's there. Otherwise, you wouldn't be in this conversation.
Exactly.
It's a question of what is blocking it. So that's what we, and if you noticed at all, what I was quote unquote doing with working people, I was trying to look at what is blocking their awareness of their true self. That's all I was doing.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's the answer to that question. A third question, a third point that I'll make before I launch into my little talk is, in my last conversation with Shoto, I think the name was, she said they'd forgiven her parents. I'd say to you, no, you haven't. You've understood your parents intellectually and where they came from. You even have compassion for their suffering, but that's not the same as forgiving them. I don't believe we do forgiveness. It's not something we do.
Yeah.
It's something that happens when we get to a certain stage. When you forgive, when you don't hold the past in any way, when you don't resent the past in any way, when you don't even resent the present, that's when you come to forgiveness. And you know why you don't? Because you realize that you're whole and here and present and good. Then there's nothing to forgive. Because if that's true, then there's no damage. If there's no damage, there's nothing to forgive. That's how you come to forgiveness, in my view. And when you said that you're angry at the system, I totally get why you would be. But it's not just anger, it's resentment. And consider, if I ask you, what were you angry about? You know what you would say? because this is a system that's supposed to nurture me and look after me, and it's letting me down. That's what you would say. And then I would say to you, is this the first time that you might have had resentment or anger towards people who're supposed to nurture you and look after you, but they're letting you down? Guess who did it first? The parents who you think you've forgiven. Hence your resentment. Otherwise, you just say, here's how it is. I don't like it. What can I do to change it or to endure it? So I'm not dismissing what you told me. I know you understand your parents. I know you love them. I know you believe for good reason that they did their best. All that is true. It's also true that you understand their suffering and you're compassionate towards them. I get that too. Forgiven them? No, you haven't. Okay? That's just a point of view. Finally, a number of people have asked about specific condition, obsessive compulsive disorder, and where that comes from and how to understand it. So that leads me right into my next talk, which I'll continue for about 25 minutes, which is the impacts of trauma. So I told you about the features of trauma and how it shows up, and I'm not going to repeat what I said, but how does that relate to health and illness of mind and body? So you heard me say earlier that all mental health conditions and virtually most of chronic physical health conditions and addictions are rooted in trauma. How's that the case? Well, let me talk to you about mental health conditions first. So my first book is called Scattered Minds. This is the book I first wrote 25 years ago now, I think, when I was diagnosed with attention deficit hyperactive disorder in my mid-50s. And of course, what I was told about it, that you got this inherited disease of the brain. And what I quickly intuited, that it's neither inherited nor is it a disease. It's not genetic and it's not a disease. What is it actually? Well, Joan, let's use you as my guinea pig here. If you and I were stuck in a room together, or you're in a room together, or even just online here, and I began to stress you, become rude or disrespectful or even aggressive in my language or my body language, what healthy options would you have?
Well, I think the first thing I would do is say, hey, what's going on?
Okay, good. And I continued. Then, what healthy options would you have?
Hey, what's going on here? And
Okay.
I also might say, I'm not entirely comfortable with what's going on.
And then I would say, I don't give a damn what you're comfortable about. And I'll continue. Now, what are your healthy options?
And then I'd probably say, I'm glad to know that.
Really? And then I'll continue and even get more aggressive. Now, what are you going to do?
Shall I dial 911? No.
Well, but that's one thing you could do, is you could ask for help, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Okay.
I think one of the things that is up for me is, of course, the gender difference.
Yeah, well, whatever. I'm just saying, you're in a
Well, it's
situation.
not whatever. It's not inconsequential.
No, of course, it's very
If you're a woman.
No, it's very consequential. I agree with you. What I'm saying, the stress doesn't stop and there's no help available. What are the healthy options?
Well, one of the options has to do with boundaries, which is, to look at, which I have done many times, at your behavior as suffering and not as aggression. So how I view your behavior really makes a difference in how I respond to it.
That's true, but and quite agree with you what you said about boundaries. But at some point, you'd have to really get aggressive about setting the boundaries. You'd have to say, no, you will not talk to me that way.
Well, I'm very comfortable doing that.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So
The
that's
people who know me know that to be the case.
Yeah, exactly. So that's one thing you could do, right? You could ask for help if it's available. You could set a boundary. And there's a
Or
third,
I could step away.
exactly. Those are the three healthy responses. Okay, exactly. Now, however,
But you said I couldn't leave. I was stuck in the room with you. So,
no, but I said, yeah, but I took that one back. Okay.
okay.
Yeah. So fair enough. Those are your three healthy options. Now, however, what if none of those three options, seeking help, setting a boundary, leaving, are available to you? Then what might happen is you wouldn't do anything. There's nothing more you could do.
Well, I think that your question's important because I would probably be afraid.
Of course, you'd be afraid.
Yeah. And
I
I would
mean,
probably, I fight, flight, or freeze. I'd probably, if I
that's
were stuck in the room with you, I would freeze.
that's just the point. You would freeze, and not that you would consciously or deliberately. Your organism would do that.
Just shut down.
Certain part of your brain would take over, and you'd shut down in order to distance yourself from what's going on.
Exactly.
So let's come back to, so that's the whole point. So I'm a 1-year-old infant, Jewish under Nazi occupation. My mother's terrorized and grieved because her parents were killed in Auschwitz. Her husband, my father's away in forced labor. She doesn't know if he's dead or alive. She's terrorized daily. She's very stressed. When the baby's stressed, when the mother is stressed, the baby's stressed. Could I fight back, escape, or seek help? No. What do? I don't do anything. My brain goes into dissociation mode. I tune out. It's automatic. But when am I tuning out? When my brain is developing, because the brain develops in interaction with the environment. This is another little secret that nobody tells you in medical school. But the human brain develops in interaction with the environment, and specifically with the emotional environment. So which circuits in the brain develop and which do not are not strictly genetically determined. It actually depends on how the environment acts on the genes. So I'm going to read you, if I can open it, and I just did, from a document, from an article that was published in a major medical journal, Pediatrics, which is the official journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics, in February 2012. The article comes from one of the most prestigious research institutions in the world, the Harvard Center on the Developing Child. And what do they say? This is their abstract. Growing scientific evidence demonstrates that social and physical environments that threaten human development because of scarcity, stress, or instability can lead to short-term physiologic and psychological adjustments that are necessary for immediate survival and adaptation, but which may come at a significant cost to long-term outcomes in learning, behavior, health, and longevity. In other words, the way kids adapt to early stress or trauma, if you like, help them survive, endure those early stresses, traumas. But those same survival mechanisms now become source of problems later on. So there am I in that situation. Lots of reasons to feel stressed, no way to escape or to change the situation, and there's nobody I can ask for help. Because my mother's state of mind is the immediate source of my stress. So to quote on the section on brain development from the same article, the interactions of genes and experiences literally shapes the circuitry of the developing brain and is critically influenced by the mutual responsiveness of adult-child relationships, particularly in the early childhood years. In other words, the most important influence on the physiological development of the child's brain is the quality of emotional relationships with the nurturing caregivers. When they're stressed, your brain doesn't get the right input. When they're emotionally not available to you, your brain doesn't get the right input. When they hurt you, your brain doesn't get the right input. Physiologically, your brain's development is then distorted. So there I am tuning out precisely when my brain is undergoing its most rapid period of development. The tuning out gets programmed in. And 55 years later, I'm diagnosed with this so-called inherited disease. It's neither a disease nor it is inherited. It was a coping mechanism that was ingrained in my brain.
Yeah.
And all mental health conditions have that source, all of them. And you can look at that statistically, that the more adverse childhood experiences a child has to endure, the greater their risk for all kinds of mental health conditions, from ADHD to psychosis. Now, they all begin as coping mechanisms. Schizophrenia. You know what schizophrenia means, actually? The meaning of the word? Split brain. Why would somebody split their brain? Because it's too painful to be connected. It's an extreme example. Depression, this inherited disease. No, it isn't. Think about it. What does it mean to depress something? What does it actually mean? It's a good English word. What does it mean? It means to push it down. What is pushed down in depression? Emotions. We talk about a flat affect in people who are depressed, flat emotional faces, because we pushed down our emotions. Why would somebody push down their emotions? Because the needs to be emotionally accepted and seen and heard wasn't met. In fact, they got the message that certain emotions are not acceptable. So the example I often give is this. If you do your job as a parent, you're going to frustrate your child. Sometimes. Because your child, 1.5, 2 years old, will want a cookie before dinner. And if you're doing your job, you're not going to give them a cookie before dinner. Now, what does an immature human being do when something they implicitly believe they need, because they have no distinction between what they want and what they need? What does an emotionally immature creature do when something they perceive as a need is denied to them? I said emotionally immature creature at any age. For example, whether a 2-year-old who doesn't get a cookie or a 71-year-old whose wife doesn't show up at the airport to pick them up. What do? They throw a tantrum. But you're a parent who's read all the latest parenting textbooks, which tell you that an angry child should be made to sit by themselves. Time out. So basically, what you're doing is holding a gun to the child's head, because the child implicitly realizes that the attachment relationship with you is essential for their survival. But now you're saying to them, yeah, I'll give you the attachment you need, but only if you behave the way I want you to, which means no anger around here. Guess what you do? Not consciously, your organism defensively and very astutely pushes down the anger. You depress it. Some years later, you're diagnosed with the so-called brain disease, genetic brain disease of depression. Nothing genetic about it. Nobody's ever found a gene for depression. Nobody's ever found a gene that if you don't have it, you can't get depressed. Nobody's ever found a group of genes that if you have them, you will be depressed. Nobody's ever found a group of genes that if you don't have them, you won't be depressed. Nobody's ever found any of this stuff for any mental health conditions. What they have found is that there's a large, very amorphous group of genes that the more of them you have, the more likely you are to have any particular mental health condition, but no specific one. So something is being inherited, but it ain't disease. OCD, it's got a, what if you had a lot of pain, emotional pain that you're carrying? but you didn't know how to face that pain. You couldn't handle the pain because when it was first incurred, you were alone and helpless, and you didn't have the resources to endure that pain. So you distance yourself from that pain. And to keep yourself distanced, you'll keep your mind on something that's completely irrelevant and trivial, like how many times you've washed your hands, or how many times you check the door to make sure that it's locked before you leave the house. It's a coping mechanism. Keeps you from looking at what actually matters. Addiction, this whole medical idea that addiction is this inherited brain disease. No, it isn't. There are no addiction genes. Whenever they think they found one, front page headline in the newspapers, they have to retract it 2 years later, back page of the newspapers, if it appears at all. I'll give you a definition of an addiction. See if you'll apply it to yourself. An addiction manifests in any behavior in which a person finds temporary pleasure or relief and therefore craves, but then suffers negative consequences as a result, but doesn't or cannot give up despite negative consequences. Hence, craving pleasure relief in the short term, harm and inability to give it up in the long term. That's what an addiction is. And I didn't say anything about drugs. I said any behavior. Gambling, shopping, eating, self-cutting, sexual roving, pornography, gaming, work, bulimia. I could go on. The issue is not the behavior. The issue is, does it give you temporary relief or pleasure and therefore you crave it and it causes you harm and you don't give it up? You've got an addiction. No. Usually in a room with any number of people, if I ask people to raise their hands if they've had an addictive pattern in their lives, most people will say yes. And the same thing is going to be true with this crowd over here. I'm going to ask you guys a question now, and I just some of you to put your answers into the chat line, and I'll read them out. Not what was wrong with your addiction, not even what your addiction was. I mean, I don't care. What was right about it? What did it do for you? Okay. Somebody said, relief from what? Stress or pain, numbing. Who needs to be numbed? Somebody who's in pain. Somebody said, I felt free, freedom, pleasure. Okay. Connection. Okay, thank you. I'll stop reading here. Connection, freedom, relief from stress, pain relief, connection. I've already said that. Anything wrong with any of that? No, it's what we all want. If it's our birthright as human beings. In fact, if you do your work and your meditation practice and your spiritual growth properly with Roshi, Joan, or anywhere else, those are all the things that you'll have. Not you'll have, that you'll be. In other words, the addiction isn't your primary problem. Your addiction, your primary problem is the loss of all that. And to sum up it in one word, it's all pain, suffering. So addiction is not a disease. It's an attempt to relieve suffering. Hence my mantra. Don't ask why the addiction, ask why the pain. Why the pain? Oh, because of trauma. As I've often pointed out, I worked in North America's most concentrated area of drug use, which is here in Vancouver, in the district called the Downtown East Side. You've never seen anything like it. If you haven't been there, you'll be shocked. I don't care where you come from. And I worked there for 12 years. In that 12-year period, I can tell you two shocking facts. I never met a single female patient of mine who had not been sexually abused as a child, number one. I barely met a female patient of mine who had ever been asked by any doctor about what happened to them in childhood. like it didn't exist. What happens to the brain? Remember what I said to you about the brain development? What happens to the brain under those conditions? It develops the hunger for relief. The opiates, our internal opiates, the endorphins, provide pain relief, and they provide a sensation of love and connection. Want to know why people do heroin? Because they need pain relief. And they need a sense of being loved. That's why people do opiates. Why do they need that? Because those conditions were denied to them as children. So that's addiction for you. Well, how can psychosis be a relief? Well, let's take paranoid schizophrenia. So you believe that creatures on Mars are controlling you in order to hurt you. Well, we know that can't be true. It's crazy. There are no creatures on Mars. But what if from the emotional point of view, you've had the experience of being small and helpless and being controlled and being hurt while being controlled? And what if that's too painful to acknowledge? What if it's safer to believe that there are people on Mars trying to do this to you? That's actually a relief, isn't it? That's what I have to say about mental health conditions. Now, this is laid out in greater detail in chapters in my new book or my previous books. Physical health conditions, rheumatoid arthritis, malignancy, multiple sclerosis, psoriasis, chronic asthma, colitis, Crohn's disease, lupus, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia. Who does it happen to? Well, in family practice and in palliative care work, I noticed that who these diseases happen to isn't accidental. There were certain personality patterns that people had who then went on to develop these diseases. And as a family physician, I had the advantage of knowing people before they got sick and knowing their backgrounds. The specialist never sees that. The specialist only sees the person once they're after sick. They're sick. And the specialists are never trained to ask about the person's history. Never. This is despite the fact that, number one, insightful physicians have always noticed these patterns, number one. And number two, we have a lot of scientific research connecting certain emotional and behavior patterns to illnesses. So multiple sclerosis. The first person to describe multiple sclerosis was a French neurologist called Jean-Martin Charcot, who in 1870 said, basically, this is a disease caused by stress. Rheumatoid arthritis in 1896, Sir William Osler, one of the founding fathers at Johns Hopkins, said that rheumatoid arthritis is a disease rooted in stress. They didn't use the word stress, but that's what they were talking about. James Paget, a British surgeon, 1870, wrote that a woman's emotional states are very much connected to the onset of breast cancer. Now, since these pioneers noticed those patterns, there's been literally a century and a half of research demonstrating the accuracy of their observations, the relationship of trauma and stress to all of these conditions. And doctors never hear about it. It's like it didn't exist. In 1938, a leading physician at Harvard gave a lecture that was published in the Journal of the Medical Association in 1940, which said that emotional factors are just as significant in the causation of physical illness as physiological factors, and they must be at least as important in the healing. He might as well dropped it into the ocean. Bermuda Triangle, like it never happened. In 1977, George Engel, an American physician, called for what he termed a biopsychosocial view health, which means that the biology of human beings is inseparable from their psychological and social dynamics and relationships. He was only stating pure science. It's like he never said it. Now, the people that develop these chronic conditions have four major features, noticed not only by myself, by the way, but unbeknownst to me, researched and documented by others, just that nobody ever told me this stuff. People that cared for the emotional, and by the way, think about yourself now, because I'm talking about your burnout too. People who put the emotional needs of others and serve them ahead of their own. In fact, they ignore their own to serve those of others. Number one. Number two, people that identify with duty, role, and responsibility rather than the authentic self. Number three, people who, unlike Joan, repress their sense of boundaries, which means their healthy anger, who don't say no, who are very nice. I worry about the very nice people. You've heard the expression, I'm not worried about Joan, but I'm worried about the very nice people. You've heard the expression, the good die young? They do.
I must
There's
not
a
be
good-
very good. And also, I hear laughter, by the way, down in the living room for the residents. They know I'm not very nice.
Very good. And probably at some point you were nicer than you might be now, you know?
Well, I learned.
That's the whole point, you know? And because there's two sources of, by the way, you might think I'm sort of denigrating kindness here. No, I'm not. There's two kinds of kindness. One is healthy and authentic.
And the other's toxic.
The other is toxic. Joan has the latter.
No, I have the former.
You have the toxic kindness?
No, you said first there's the healthy and then the
sorry,
toxic.
sorry, yeah.
That's okay. I don't want you to completely ruin my reputation.
No. I meant that you have the healthy kindness, which comes from knowing oneself and being authentically yourself, which means you're authentically going to be compassionate towards others, you know? But the other kind of kindness comes there by suppressing yourself, and you're being kind, not just because it's your true nature, because you're afraid not to be, because you learn that you're only acceptable when you put your needs secondary to those of other people. So that's the third feature, this repression of healthy anger, healthy boundaries. And the fourth one is manifested in two beliefs that you're responsible for other people feel, and you must never disappoint anybody.
Ugh.
Now, why would people develop these beliefs? And I'm going to stop talking here in a moment, because in childhood, they're faced with a tragic choice. And that, again, is what in the myth of normal, in a chapter we call the tragic tension between authenticity and attachment. Attachment is our need to belong, to be accepted. Without that, the human child does not survive, because they're so helpless and vulnerable and dependent and immature. They have to attach. They have to be attached too by the parents as well. They have to be close to somebody for the sake of being taken care of. But we have another need as well, which is authenticity. And authenticity is being in touch with our feelings, especially our gut feelings, and being able to act on them. Now, we evolved out there in nature for millions of years and hundreds of thousands of years until very recently. We lived out there in nature. Just how long does any creature in nature survive if they're not in touch with their gut feelings? So we're not talking about some new age luxury here. We're talking about survival. However, when push comes to shove, if the child gets the message that your authentic emotions are not acceptable here, guess what they're going to choose every time? The authenticity or the attachment? There's no choice. They go for the attachment, suppressing their authenticity. And that becomes your pattern for the rest of your life. And when you suppress your authentic self, including a healthy anger, because of the mind and body, and I'm not going to go into the science of it now, I just don't have the time. You can read my books. When the body says no, you can read The Myth of Normal, other literature on the subject. But we now know scientifically from the decades-old discipline of psychoneuroimmunology, that our emotions are part and parcel of the same apparatus as is the immune system, the nervous system, and our hormones. When you're suppressing your emotions, you're also messing with your hormones and your nervous system and your immune system. Because that healthy no, that healthy anger, that's a boundary defense. What is your immune system? It's a boundary defense. They're one system. They're not connected. They're one system. When you suppress one aspect of it, you're messing with the other. And now you've got an immune system that'll attack you. Just like the anger that you suppressed will attack you in the form of self-loathing. The immune system will attack you. Now you've got autoimmune disease. You want to know why 80% of autoimmune disease happens to women? Because they're the gender in this society that is most acculturated to suppressing the healthy anger in their boundaries. And why women of color? Why does an indigenous woman in Canada have 6 times the rate of rheumatoid arthritis? 6 times? When they used to have no rheumatoid arthritis whatsoever prior to colonization? It's because they're the ones of whom the cold culture most demands that they suppress themselves. A, because they're women, and B, because they're colored, of color, so-called. So, whether you're looking at physical illness, by the way, the same is true of malignancy. So, whether you're talking about autoimmune disease, malignancy, any set of mental health conditions, addictions, you're talking about the impacts of trauma, about which little thing nobody in medical school ever gets a single lecture, despite all the scientific evidence, some of which I cite in my new book. I collected 25,000 articles to write this book. I could cite a small percentage of them. That's my little sermon at this morning.
Well, thank you. So we have a lot to absorb. I'm going to suggest that we have a break until the top of the hour, please. And then we're going to come back. And Gabor, I just would appreciate you opening to more work with people, and then we'll move into questions and answers toward the end of our session.
Of course.
Wonderful.
It's the only way you would, sorry?
Understanding.
Amor y comprensión. Love. Oh, muy buena pregunta.
To give love, to be empathic, to have empathy.
Yeah.
Empatizando.
To being empathic.
Yeah. Exactly. Okay. Thank you.
Gracias, Dr. Mate.
I'd like to invite Rachel, who is part of our Upaya community here, one of our residents. Rachel.
Hey, thank you. Dr. Mate, I have a question concerning what the research shows about specific treatment modalities for addiction. I have a daughter who's 22 years old, and for the past 3 years, she's been in and out of treatment, always relapsing. And this last time we let her be homeless for 4 weeks, along the theory of she would hit her bottom, and if she hit her bottom, then she would recover. And that's a very scary thing to do, knowing that I think that fentanyl is the leading cause of death for 18 to 49-year-old people in the country today. So then when that didn't work, we took her to Florida and put her under a Marchman Act, which mandated her by order.
Sorry, what did you do? You took her to Florida to
put her under the Marchman Act, which is basically a law in Florida that allowed us to court order her into treatment so that she would be arrested if she tried to leave treatment. And that is where she is now, and she's not doing well there either.
Of course not.
And so before we did that, I work as an attorney in the criminal justice system. I did a lot of research, and what the research told me, and I don't know if you would agree with this, is that forced treatment can be as effective as voluntary treatment. And under that premise, we went forward with this forced treatment. So now we're kind of faced with what to do. We can continue the forced treatment, or we could try an alternative treatment like ayahuasca or something else. And I'm just wondering what you think the research shows and her best chances of beating the addiction.
Okay, well, thank you. What a difficult situation. First of all, are you on board? Do you recognize the traumatic sources of her addiction?
Absolutely. I've read your book.
Okay. In the realm of hungry ghosts?
Yes.
Has any treatment facility ever addressed the trauma?
Yes. They all say that they address the trauma. I mean, some of them have been more 12-step oriented, but the one she's in now is supposed to be very much trauma-based.
Has anybody ever asked her what the drug does for her?
It takes away her anxiety, specifically social anxiety, but anxiety generally.
Okay. Has anybody ever validated that that's a perfectly reasonable goal to escape anxiety?
I think that yes, that they have done that.
Does she want to heal from her addiction?
No, I don't think she does.
Okay. Well, that's a problem. Because here's the thing. Just put up your left hand like this. Now put your right hand. Now put your hand against each other. Now push as hard as you can with the right hand against the left hand. Push as hard as you can with the right hand. What does the left hand do?
Pushes back.
Automatically. That's what your daughter's doing. That's called counterwill. That's the automatic resistance to being pushed. Even if people are pushing you in the right direction, you're going to resist. So that's the first point. And that's an automatic human response, by the way. So I don't believe in forced treatment. I just don't. As far as hitting bottom, I worked in downtown East Side with people with severe addictions, multiple convictions, HIV, hepatitis C. Their friends are dying around them. They're still not giving it up. There's no such thing as rock bottom. I don't believe in hitting people rock bottom. If hitting the rock bottom helped, nobody in the downtown East would be there anymore. So I'll tell you what I think, but you're gonna have to decide for yourself, because I can't. This is a radical position, okay? I suggest radical acceptance, which mean that you accept the possibility your daughter may die, because you never know when she's going to buy the wrong batch, and it's going to have fentanyl in it instead of some other opiate. And then I'd say to her, I'm sorry for trying to push you. This is your life, not mine. And I've made it my job to change your life, but I don't have a right to do that. If you're using, it's because you have some deep reason that keeps you using. And then it's not for me to tell you what to do. Here's what I'm worried about. So can we at least talk about safe use? Can we make sure that the sources you have are safe and the drugs you use are safe so you won't overdose? Will you let us work with you on that? And whenever you're ready to move, in the meanwhile, we understand something. We understand that the pain that you're carrying is not yours. It didn't start with you. You're just a sensitive person who's feeling it all. But that pain came to you through other people, including your parents. So you're carrying our pain. So trying to fix you, we're just further hurting you. Sorry, we're going to stop doing that. We're going to look after our own pain, and we're going to let you deal with your own. And if we can support you in that, we will, any way we can. But we're not going to try and run the ship anymore. We're not going to try and control it anymore. And whatever the consequences, which we're afraid of, but we're going to accept. So I'm not giving you words to say, I'm giving you an attitude. And the reason I'm saying, Rachel, that I'm not giving you words, because even if you use these same words that I just gave you, but if you didn't embody them, they wouldn't work. So only take on these words if you can really embody them and make them yours. Having said that, if she is it oxy that she says she uses?
She mixes alcohol and cocaine.
Oh, alcohol and cocaine. Okay. Let me ask you a question. Did she ever have attention problems growing up?
I saw that in your book, and I asked them to give her some medication to test that idea that she has ADD, and she's doing well on that, but it still isn't enough to keep her from using.
Got it. I suggest you also read my book on ADD, Scattered Minds, okay? Because what she's doing is she's self-medicating. Those are typical drugs to self-medicate ADHD with. Because the cocaine actually gives them the dopamine to make them feel more alive, and the alcohol soothes the hyperactive mind. Now, so you tell her, I totally get why you're using. It makes you feel better. Of course you want to feel better. Now with cocaine and alcohol, the risk of overdose, not that it's not there, but it's less than with the opiates. Okay, so if she's willing to work with you on safe use, work with her. Sweetheart, you say to them, if you're going to use, you're going to use, but I'd rather work with you to make sure that what you're using is not going to kill you. Is that okay? Can we work on that? Now, if she wants treatment, then you have possibilities of psychedelics, okay? And particularly, I might recommend either ayahuasca or iboga. And Joan knows how to get a hold of me. If your daughter ever wants to go that route, we can have a conversation about that. But it has to be her call. Now, I'm going to stop here, Rachel, and ask you how this lands for you.
It's what I felt to be the truth. It's just very hard.
It's very hard. It's very hard to do. And what's in the way of you doing it?
Say that again.
What's in the way? What makes it hard for you to do it? I'm saying it isn't hard. I'm asking you specifically for you. What's hard about it?
Letting her die, because there's a decent chance that she would do that. She was, when she was living on the streets, she was doing very, very dangerous things, and she was doing a lot more street drugs than just alcohol and cocaine.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, don't do any of this if it doesn't feel right to you. And I would totally understand if you said, well, let's give this forced treatment a try, because at least it's something. I get that. And maybe, who knows? But I'm telling you what I would do.
Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome.
Rachel, thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Jenny.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
Gosh, I feel so for Rachel in this moment. Thank you for sharing. My question is completely different as a palliative care physician in a really tough environment. I think we all practice in those in healthcare, but being in the front lines for, really three years now and beyond, and not seeing that things are getting better. They're just transforming into other kind of problematic areas and system problems. I've been on this journey of, I guess I would say, kind of wonderful learning and self-exploration in a way, and have seen a lot of kind of inner transformation, just in exploring, kind of where I sit in the world with my experience, but how that translates into, kind of externally as well. But from a system perspective, I want to continue to be engaged and work in the ways I can in the system, so to speak. But I also hear a lot of futility in doing that because the system is rigged, the system is huge, and there's many power dynamics. I appreciate, I feel hopeful at times, but also want to be realistic. And, sometimes I use different levers of, moral outrage or anger to, potentially, force some system change at times on a very small level. But, that can lead to some conflict too, because I often wonder, am I harming somebody else when expressing moral outrage or trying to pressure a system to do what I think, quote unquote, is the right thing? So I'm currently trying to figure out how to work within a system that's so broken, but in a moral and ethical way that does help, but also doesn't burn me to the ground at the same time. And I don't want to disengage from that process either, but it's increasingly difficult.
There's an article, Jen, in either this week's or last week's New Yorker magazine on the hospice industry. What a scamming, money-grubbing, exploitative, dishonest system it is. Pure profiteering. So
Yeah.
as you know, I used to work in palliative care as well, but the Canadian system it's a public system, and I didn't face those pressures. My question to you is, first of all, what is it costing you?
Kind of depends on what it is and what the cost is. I think at times it's a cost of physical exhaustion or emotional exhaustion. At other times it's
can you stop? Can you
it can
stop?
be moral cost too.
Can you stop a second?
Sure.
You just said physical exhaustion, right?
Yes.
If I had a video of you talking, and if I didn't know what you were saying, if I didn't hear the words, what would I have seen in your face?
I'm not sure.
You're probably not aware of it. Okay. Is it okay if I ask Joan what she saw in your face? Is that okay?
Oh yeah, of course.
What did you see her doing, Joan?
I see a lot of sorrow.
That's what you see. But
Yeah.
what was the face doing?
Oh, putting on a nice smile.
Exactly. Which you're doing now.
Yes, it's one of my things. I go to a narrative of it's okay. I say that and then I catch myself and I do smile, smile through the pain, so to speak.
Yeah. So to be more accurate, you're not actually doing it. It's not like you make a conscious, deliberate decision to do it. It does itself. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask you again, what's the impact on you is, and this time, really be in touch with what it's like. And if possible, tell us what it's like, if you can do it without the smile. What's it like for you? What's the impact on you?
The impact, I do think is very deep grief for me.
Okay.
And that seems to be kind of a bottomless source of suffering at this time.
Okay. So experiencing deep grief, deep suffering, yes?
Correct.
And exhaustion.
Yes.
So if I came to you and I said, I'm engaged in an activity that causes me, I think you used bottomless or endless suffering. You used one of those words. Deep grief. What advice do you think you might give me?
I think, I don't know that I would have advice, but I would question, why do you continue?
That's exactly right. You would invite me to examine why you keep doing it. Why do you keep doing it?
I think it does go back to, there is a place of hope for me in alleviating suffering for others, but also myself in a way.
Can't do both. It's either causing you deep, endless suffering or it's alleviating it. Which is it doing for you?
Depends on the day.
Overall.
I think overall, I would say it leans, while the grief is deep, I feel that there's a larger component to alleviating suffering at this time.
Of others or of your own?
I'd say others.
I'm asking about you. Remember what I said about people who get ill? What's the first thing I said? Do you remember? People put other people's emotional needs ahead of their own while ignoring their own.
Yes.
Okay.
Very true.
Well, Jenny knows this well, pathological altruism.
I have it bookmarked.
So,
It's something I work on, but fail continuously.
so look, this book that I wrote called When the Body Says No, it's about the fact that if you don't know how to say no, your body's going to say it for you. It already is. The question is, are you going to listen or not?
Working on it.
That's not what the question is.
Yes.
Are you going to listen?
Yes. Recently I have been.
Okay.
In the
And how
past, definitely not.
Okay. Now, incidentally, you're not being criticized here. At a certain point in your life, remember what I said about quoting from that Harvard article that these early survival mechanisms help you endure the early difficulties, but they become sources of problems later on?
Yes.
So when was the first time that people around you were suffering and you made it your responsibility to lessen their suffering at your own cost?
Oh, very young, probably as early as 5.
At least.
Yeah.
At least that's what you can recall. Likely it goes back even before then. You're still doing it. You're still functioning from the belief system of a 5-year-old. So I don't know what to tell you except, Jennifer, this is a common dilemma of healthcare givers. These are the people that are drawn into healthcare. The ultimate cost is burnout, illness, what they call compassion fatigue. By the way, there's no such thing as compassion fatigue.
Thank you.
You know? You know what there is? Compassion is part of who we are as human beings. We don't get tired of being ourselves. But the compassion has to go both ways. But if we more ways, you're more compassionate towards others than you are to yourself. Might that be accurate?
I'm so sorry. I think you froze for just a moment. And
Okay. I said if I knew you more closely, I might find that in many ways you're more compassionate towards others than you are to yourself.
Oh, yeah. I don't think you have to go far to find that out.
Okay. That's where compassion fatigue comes from. It doesn't come from being compassionate towards others. It comes from not being compassionate towards ourselves. So I call it a lack of compassion fatigue. And now you have a decision to make. Are you really going to be compassionate towards yourself? Are you really going to listen to what your body is already telling you very loudly, by the way?
Yeah. Yes.
No, actually, I don't think you know. What you
It's
do know, what you do know right now is your intention, right?
correct.
I have had lots of intentions that I haven't really acted on all that well, you know? So, but at least right now, do you have the intention of being compassionate towards yourself?
Yes,
Do you have the intention of listening to your body?
absolutely.
Okay. I suggest you read my book When the Body Says No, if you haven't already.
I will.
And the new one as well, you know. But it's, yeah, you can take this one on.
Yeah, I feel like I'll probably fail 1,000 times, but I can.
Yeah, you will. Yeah, of course.
You try.
Of course you will. Yeah, of course you will. No, you know what? The work that you're doing is sacred work. For you to show up as a human being in the midst of this mechanical system, this corrupt system, and you be the one that these people at this final stage of their lives or their families get to interact with, I can't think of a more sacred work. I'm not asking you or suggesting that you give up the work. I'm suggesting that you put yourself first, and then you decide what you want to do about the work. If you can do both, terrific. If for whatever reason you can't, then you have a decision to make. But this time, make it consciously. As a child, you didn't have that freedom.
Yeah.
Now, what does this leave you for now?
I think that's all, 1,000% very true, and practicing more self-agency and self-compassion. That sounds very right. That feels very right.
Okay, great. Well, thank you then.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. Let's take a breath, please. You know, and what Jenny Lacoste was sharing, I think, applies to many people in medicine, and many physicians, nurses, people in hospice work. And I just want to say your courage, Jenny, in facing into the wind of these questions and this inquiry, which I know you pretty well. And I know you've taken some steps recently that are very radical in addressing exactly where Gabor was going with you. So just thank you. And I've traveled alongside you for now 3 or 4 years, and I have so much respect for your courage and your honesty. Thank you. Noah.
Yeah. Hi, Jesse.
Oh, hello.
Hi.
Can you guys hear me? Okay.
Yeah.
Everybody asks that, don't they? Thank you so much, Roshi, Joan, and Gabor, Dr. Mate. I have so many questions I could ask you. I am a physician and a child of trauma. And I've had a few times in my life when in interpersonal relationships, my anger and mistrust have become big problems. And I'm currently in a state of limbo with my wife, determining whether or not we will reconcile or not. We have one small child. I have two older children that I have partial custody with, and I've been a physician through the pandemic. That's the background. I think my core question is one of the hardest things for me. You mentioned that we lose intuition, and I can trust my intuition in a lot of ways. I can mostly, I think, trust it with my children and as a parent and as a physician. In intimate relationships, it becomes very hard for me to know whether I am hearing intuition, sometimes reliable intuition, or very, very deeply rooted patterns of fear.
Yeah.
The term hypervigilance, is the term we use. And I absolutely understand at 49 years old that I have made many decisions in relationship in my life based on what felt like certainty that in retrospect were patterns of mistrust that served me when I was 11 years old and running a house full of 4 other kids and full of danger, that have served me poorly now. Do you have any insight about, I sit and I meditate and I'm certainly making progress in terms of being well. But that discerning what's my intuition that I should listen to and what I should just continue to sit with is difficult. So I just wondered if you had any thoughts about that.
Well, thank you. It's a very common dilemma. So the spiritual teacher Eckhart Tolle says that intuitions, gut feelings are your body's response to the world, but emotions are your body's response to the mind. In other words, their response to your beliefs. Now, you heard my story of getting back at the airport. My wife's not there. I go into a rave,
Yes.
Believe me, it's a powerful one. I'm 78 years old now.
Yes.
I'm 78. And my wife and I, who've been together, we just had our 53rd wedding anniversary. Even a week ago, when we have sort of a alienation or a dissonance in our relationship, my mind goes, God, am I with the right woman? Maybe I should get, maybe I should be out of here, Is that intuition or is it something else?
Right.
So how do we tell the difference? So let me ask you a question.
Yes.
When you're in a state of intuition, what is the state of your body?
Calm.
When you're in a state of hypervigilance and whatever you do, what is the state of your body?
Yeah, it's not calm.
That's how it's not. What is the state of your body?
Oh, sorry. It
It's
is anxious.
Yeah.
Sometimes angry. Very, very energetic.
Wait a minute. Those aren't body states. Those are the emotions.
Emotions.
What are the body states that those emotions represent? What's actually in your body? Imagine yourself angry.
Fear. No, that's an emotion too.
That's also, what's the body state? What's in your body?
It's very activated.
What is it?
Energetic.
Yeah. Tense.
Tense. Yeah, very much tense. I don't stay still when
That's how you tell the difference, okay?
That makes sense. That makes it's true.
Yeah, so you just pay attention to your body. And you know what is a authentic, intuitive gut feeling and what is your body. Now, you may consciously and calmly decide to leave your wife.
Yes.
But when you do, there's not going to be tension in here.
Right.
There might be sadness. There might be love for her. There might be compassion towards both of you.
Yes.
But it's not, it's not going to be this tense state, okay?
Yeah.
So just listen to your body.
Yes.
Okay, does that
Thank you.
answer your question?
Yes, and of course, it is something that I think, oh, right, I think I have talked about that before. Yes, thank you so much.
You're welcome. By the way, something just occurred to me. I wasn't going to mention this, but it just popped into my head. Some of you are interested in psychedelic work, I know. There's a place in Peru called the Temple of the Way of Light, which is an ayahuasca center. It's called the Temple of the Way of Light. You can Google it. You can Google my name and the Temple of the Way of Light. And on YouTube, I talk about my experience there. In the book, The Myth of Normal, chapter 31 is on my experience with psychedelics. The reason I'm mentioning it is because they're about to have a retreat, an ayahuasca retreat with the Shipibo healers for healthcare givers, the wounded healers. And some of you may be interested in checking it out. Now, I don't know the people that are leading it, but they sound like good people. So you can check it out, Temple of the Way of Light, the Wounded Healer Retreat. They'll tell you the leaders and so on. So it's work with the psychedelic plant with the guidance of Western physicians who are trained in these issues, and then working with the Shipibo shamans. So I'm not selling it to you. I'm just telling you it's available for those of you that are interested. Okay.
Thank
and
you.
it's specifically for healthcare givers. And I just got the notice 2 days ago.
Can I say one other thing that makes me think of Gabor, is
Yeah.
that I recently became manager after being just a primary care physician taking care of veterans in a rural community for
Yeah.
a long time, and wondering whether my colleague and I both were just crazy about how hard this was and how much we were suffering. And of course, no.
Yeah.
And maybe, I guess there's growing awareness, but holy mackerel, is there a crisis
Yeah.
in healthcare of mental health?
Absolutely.
And it's empowering in some way to know that and see that and try to go to work knowing that every day. But
Yeah.
thank you so much for
You're
this.
welcome.
I cannot thank you enough.
And it also means that you have to take care of yourself.
Yes, absolutely.
When I went to the temple, I'm not going to tell you the story now, but this is 3.5 years ago now. Just before I went to work on this book, the shamans fired me from a retreat I was supposed to lead because they said, you're carrying too much stress and you haven't taken care of yourself.
Yeah.
And that retreat was for doctors and psychologists and psychiatrists. and they said they've never met such a heavy bunch.
No, I
Carrying
gained 60 pounds.
Carrying when I say heavy, not just physically,
Right.
heavy like emotionally.
Yeah.
We don't take care of ourselves.
Right.
And they picked up on that and they said, you have not been taking yourself. You can't lead this retreat.
Yeah.
You can read all about it in chapter 31 of my book.
I certainly will.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Forgive me for laughing, Gabor.
No, it's funny.
No, I
It's
know.
It's really funny.
My
You know,
cardiologist friends have the worst diet in the world. You
yeah.
know?
No, listen, 24 doctors and psychiatrists and psychologists from 4 continents came to work in the Peruvian jungle with the great Gabor, and the shamans the shamans do one ceremony, and next morning they say to the great Gabor, "You're fired." And they didn't know anything about me. They didn't know my history.
It's not impossible to see.
Yeah, well, I guess so. But they got it like that. So
Okay, Besa, hi, it's good to see you. And Besa, go to Essence because we're coming to the end.
okay.
Sorry, I'm attempting to unmute you, but it doesn't seem to be working.
It's because she's unmuting herself when you're unmuting her. Stop. You got it.
Oh, she's still muted.
No, I'm,
No, oh, good. Yeah, here you are. Hi.
hello, thank you for the opportunity. Give me a moment, please.
Yeah.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I have multiple sclerosis. So that will just give you a background on my trauma history.
So I can tell you about you. You're one of these very nice people. You have a hard time getting angry in a healthy way. You give to others way more than you give to yourself. And you have great difficulty saying no to people. Is that accurate or not?
That has been the story of my journey.
And that's why you have multiple sclerosis. So now, please go on, because there's good news here.
Exactly. So at my 20-something year of age, it was either stay in this realm of living or completely check out.
Yeah.
And I was unsuccessful multiple times at doing that. So at that point, I remembered Dogen and Lao Tzu and decided that whatever was going on in my body, I needed to just move through it and not focus on it. And so that's why Buddhism came into my life.
Mm-hmm.
So now I'm at this apex where I'm also on the autism spectrum. And I've been 30 years in my Buddhist practice and shamanistic practices.
Okay.
And so now I have a son. And my son, who has autism, and it presents itself as oppositional defiant disorder, which is his willfulness.
There's no such thing as oppositional defiant disorder.
Exactly, there is no, but that's what he's been labeled. Yeah. And so now, as a parent, I have given him wings and given him space. And it's so hard because I see his suffering. And then when he reacts, it causes me suffering. And then my body.
No, it doesn't. How you react to his reaction causes you suffering.
Take a deep breath.
No, his reaction. Listen, I'm saying something. His reaction doesn't cause you suffering. It's your perception of his reaction that causes you suffering.
So when he yells and screams?
That doesn't cause you suffering. That's a human being yelling and screaming. If you have suffering, it's because what does it mean for you when he's yelling and screaming?
It means for me that I've failed.
Uh-huh.
I have failed him somehow.
That's what I just said. It's not his yelling and screaming that causes you suffering, it's your perception of it.
But what causes
so there's so many things that I want to talk to you about. Okay, I gotta take 3 hours just talking to you right now. But let's just jump in, okay?
Let's jump.
If I came to you and said, my son yells and screams at me, naturally you would say to me, Gabor, you're a failure. Yes?
No.
Oh, you wouldn't.
Because that child is screaming.
Yeah, but would you say to me, Gabor, you're a failure?
No, I wouldn't.
Why not?
Because something is causing for that child to scream. And for you to take on that blame, then, I mean,
Wait a minute. What if, even if it was true, that something about the way I raised him when he was younger is not leading him to yell and scream? Would you tell me that I'm a failure?
No, because it's not my place to judge you or your experience.
Oh, why not?
Because you're sharing with me that your child is screaming and I'm listening to you.
So I'm not a failure, but you are, right?
I understand what you just said.
What's
But
that?
my son has been taught how to meditate since he's 3.
I don't care about that. I'm talking to you right now, but you're not gonna wiggle out of this one, okay? Are you okay talking about this? Are you
Yes,
okay?
I am. Please, I want to learn.
Okay. Do you notice that you wouldn't judge me a failure, but you're judging yourself a failure? Do you notice that? No. Are you willing to be fair about it or not?
Yes.
Either call me a failure or don't call yourself a failure either. One or the other. Which one would you rather go with? We're either both failures or neither of us is. Which one would you rather go with right now?
Nobody is a failure.
Ah, so you're not a failure either. So then what actually happened is that you had trauma as a child. You passed that trauma on to your child, probably. Does that make you a failure?
No.
No. Okay. Now, that's the first point, okay? Second point. I mean, what was it like to have multiple sclerosis and to have a small child?
Exhausting.
Yeah. Can you see how in some ways you might not have met all his needs? Even though you did your best?
Yes.
Can you see that?
Yes.
Can you see that might have left him frustrated?
Yes.
Okay. Point number one, okay? Point number two, no such thing as oppositional defiant disorder. It doesn't exist. It can't even theoretically exist. Not even in theory. Why not? Tell me something. If my foot was broken, would it matter to me whether you and Joan and everybody else is online with me? Would my foot be less broken or more broken if I was alone or if you're with me? Yes or no?
No, it would still be broken.
It would still be broken, exactly. And if my foot wasn't broken, would it be broken because you're with me or you're not with me?
No.
Okay. But could I oppose somebody if I was by myself?
You can oppose yourself.
Can I oppose somebody else if I'm not with them?
No.
Okay. Now, those of you that don't understand what I'm talking about, this is a challenge, an issue. After this session is over, lock yourself into a room, make sure there's nobody there, and oppose somebody. And if you manage to do it, put it on YouTube, for God's sakes. In other words, oppositionality implies a relationship. Why are we diagnosing the children instead of looking at the relationships that they're in? Right?
Yes.
Because we're stupid. I'm talking about as a profession.
Mhm.
Number one. Number two, remember that exercise I had with somebody, might have been Rachel, push with one hand, push with the other one pushes back? Children do that automatically. They start doing it at age 1.5. What's the word they all start saying age 1.5?
No.
No. They need to do that to develop their own boundaries. Now, the more you push on that, guess what's going to happen? The more they're going to push back. the less they trust you, the more they're going to push back. It's the relationship we have to change, not the child. So I know this sounds like I'm recommending my own books, but I am recommending my own books. How old is your child?
He just turned 18.
Okay, get my book. It's called Hold On to Your Kids. Please read it, okay?
Yes. Thank you.
And be curious about when he yells at and screams at you. Just, okay, you're really upset right now. You say to him, but when you're not as upset, can we please talk about it?
We use that technique.
Okay, good. And how's it going?
He stays quiet for
There you
a
go.
long time.
How about that? And go back afterwards and talk about it. When you were upset and screaming at me, you must have been full of rage. You must have hated me. What was going on for you? You must have thought I did something, or maybe I did something to upset you. I'd like to hear about it. Have a conversation with him. Not in the middle of it, but once you've reestablished the relationship. Okay? That's my next point. My third point is about your multiple sclerosis. You said you had multiple sclerosis?
I do.
No, you don't.
I have 24 lesions in my brain.
Yeah, there's lesions in your brain, but you don't have multiple sclerosis. Do you know why? I have a cup. Right? You see that I have a cup? I can put the cup down. I can pick it up. I can drink from it. I can break it. I can give it away. It's not a part of me. There's me, and I have this object called a cup. The doctors tell you that there's this thing called multiple sclerosis. And you've got either the chronic progressive kind or the remitting relapsing kind, but it's got a life of its own. No, it doesn't. It's a process inside you that's manifesting your life. You don't have it. It's not a thing that you have. It's a manifestation of what happened to you as a child when you were programmed to suppress yourself for the sake of being accepted by your family. To the extent that you're still acting out that process, every time you have a flare-up of multiple sclerosis, there was something stressful before because you didn't say no. The multiple sclerosis is just trying to say no on your behalf. You listen to it. You learn from it. It doesn't have to keep coming around. If you learn to listen to yourself, that process will change. Your doctors don't have a clue about that. You know why? Because they haven't looked at all the literature that shows the relationship between stress, trauma, and these self-suppressive patterns and multiple sclerosis. I beg you to read my book, okay?
Yes.
I talk a lot about multiple sclerosis in there, and I can give you examples of people that heal from it by listening to themselves. So there's no such thing as multiple sclerosis. It's not a thing that you have like a cup. It's a process. That process manifests your life, and your mind is not separable from your body. So the symptoms manifest your mind body since your conception. You can get agency over that process. I'm telling you.
I agree with you.
Great. Then we fixed your kid, we fixed you, we're all good.
Bless you. Thank you. You're a true
Okay.
gem.
Are you complete now for this?
I am.
Okay. Thank you.
My dear friend, we are approaching 4 o'clock. At some, my request of you is that you give your sense of what transpired today and what your experience is.
Well, I experienced a deep invitation to show up. I experienced from others, yourself saliently, very respectful and very loving listening, all of which felt very comfortable for me. I'll be glad to say goodbye because I want to stop working now. This is the last big commitment since my book tour began back in September. And now it's time to be with myself and retrieve. And I began to connect with myself, not to be focused on externals. So I have some fatigue right now, a lot of gratitude, a lot of respect for the people that so vulnerably made themselves available to work with me. And finally, I just want to give you the secret. You wanted to know what I do? Now, maybe some of you already know. You just show up in the present. You validate people's narratives, but you don't buy into them. You see the person for who they really are, not for who they believe themselves to be. And you invite them to be themselves. And you point out that compassion needs to go both ways. You're all very good at giving compassion to others. You probably give